So, hi everyone, I am back. Welcome to Vigilani. My name is Ani. Thanks for coming in and tuning in. Hey Rai Guy, I see you in the chat. Thanks for joining me. It is my very first live stream on the Vigilani channel. It's been a long time coming, and it's been a long time since I've actually put out a video. Anyone in the chat, Rai Guy, let me know if you can hear me okay. If the sound's all right. Alfredo, turn off. If you have YouTube on, turn it off.
I don't have anything on. The only thing that came on was the AC. Do you hear a hum? Is that why?
There's kind of a little bit of feedback, but
oh, okay. I'll go ahead and
in the background, like there's like background sound or something.
Yeah, I'll turn that off. One second.
Turn. All right. So while he comes back, my guest today is Alfredo Vicente. He has been studying alchemy for many years now. Hey, EC. Hey, Rai. Thanks for coming, guys, and showing your support. Alfredo's a student of alchemy. He's been studying under Robert Bartlett, who was a student of Frater Albertus. So there's some pedigree there in terms of where he's been getting his knowledge from. And Alfredo and I have known each other, just a little background, for well over 20 years. I've known him since the early years of channeling. He was there at the beginning and bore witness to all the craziness that came through. And he himself, hey Zeno, Red's in the house, literally, and in this house as well. I lost my train of thought. What was I saying?
Yeah, that was with you at early on with the
yes,
the
early on you were witness to all the channeling, and you yourself channeled the whole book Spectroscopy that at some point presumably you'll put out. And aside from that, Alfredo also happens to be my ex-husband. So without further ado, help me welcome Alfredo. And I wanted to bring him on here. I wanted to bring you on. As you know, I've been pleading for a while for you to come on, but I know you're a little camera shy, so I really appreciate you coming on here and sharing this information with us. So on the topic of practical alchemy, which is today's topic, and we're gonna just kind of go on, start with the intro, since it's a topic that most people don't know very much about. For the majority of us, I think all people, when they first hear of alchemy, it's the proverbial turning lead into gold. And other perspectives are that it's sorcery or quackery, and more recently there's been an understanding where it also applies to inner alchemy. So Alfredo, I wanted to start off with maybe a little background on alchemy and why it's so obscure, why it had to go underground. So if you want to pick up there. I'm still getting some feedback. I don't know if
you still are.
Do you hear feedback from me or from you?
No, you sound really clear. When I speak, can you hear feedback from my mic? I mean, everything is shut off except like an overhead fan, but there's not much.
Yeah, no, it's when you're quiet that I hear noise. But anyway, maybe it's just some weird feedback. But anyway, so yeah, if you wanna jump in and get into why and around when alchemy had to go underground and what it is exactly.
Well, yeah, I mean, it really started with the Egyptians, at least as far as we know, because it's almost like Plato when he talks about like the ancients or Socrates. Like there's always an older presence of people or civilization or individuals that they themselves seem to refer back to. But as far as what we know, in terms of documented history, it started really with the Egyptians. It was sort of like, I believe it was the Scorpion King that united all the tribes at around 3100 BC, 3000 BC, give or take. And from there on, for the following like 2500 years, give or take, it developed into like a burgeoning civilization, into a burgeoning society. And so eventually stuff such as if you want to call it like primitive pharmacology or herbalism, you know, mummification, ceramics, metallurgy. The Egyptians developed those crafts, and you know, once again had a had a kind of height of civilization. Now, at around, I believe it was like 300 BC, is when the Greeks, particularly with Alexander the Great, came around, and they began to kind of cross pollinate, you know, the cultures. That's when they entered the so-called like Ptolemaic period, which was like the Greco-Egyptian period at around that time, give or take. And so you began to have a lot of what they call syncretism, which is again an infusion of cultures and customs, or that interpenetrate one another's societies. So, like for example, you know how Santeria is like a Catholicized African religion, where it's like Santa Barbara is the Yoruban Shango.
Yeah, the merger of Catholicism and Lukumi, for example, religion.
And Lukumi, exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. So the same thing happened with the Greeks, and you know, with the Greek religions and the Egyptian ones. So, for example, and here's is kind of like our foray into, you know, this whole alchemical thing and the Hermetic philosophy. They're Tahuti, you know, and I really need like this landmark, because this stuff is so broad that it's like, all right, how do I find a segue?
Just pick a spot. Pick a
Yeah,
spot.
exactly. I'm holding on to it for dear life. So yeah, basically their Tahuti became, or rather their Tahuti was interpreted by the Greeks as Hermes, you know, as the Hermes Trismegistus or whatever.
Okay, so it's what people referred to as Thoth. Is that what you mean by Tahuti?
Tahuti, exactly. Yeah, as Thoth, or the ibis-headed god. And so, yeah, essentially they interpreted Tahuti as Mercury, and eventually that, how do you call it, that compendium of what they call the sacred sciences, because there was alchemy in ancient Egypt. It just happened to have a different flavor than, say, what it eventually evolved into. But
didn't the name alchemy actually originate from Kemet, from the ancient name of Egypt?
right, yeah, the Greeks called the Black Land, you know, called Egypt the Black Land, or Kemet, because of course the Nile would like flood the land, and essentially you had this really black, rich soil, and so they called it Kemet. So, and Chemia was known as the black arts, you know, and eventually, when, for example, Greek civilization started waning and Rome started gaining power, and a lot of the at that point Greek alchemists who had learned under, say, in the Egyptian tradition or the Egyptian mystery schools, they had to flee east toward Arab lands. And so when they began to cross-pollinate, you know, the Arabs, and at that point the Greco-Egyptians, who at that point were more Greek than Egyptian, so to speak. And damn, I lost my train of thought.
About the name,
yeah,
the Arabs.
the Arabs, exactly.
Thanks.
Yeah, the Arabs added that Arabic particle called al, and so it became alchemia. So that was pretty much the advent of the word that kind of like still sticks with us today, you know. In terms of persecution,
a quick question. You mentioned the black arts. Is that a reference to the Black Land, or is it in the context of what we understand black arts today?
Yeah, bueno, because most of what we know in terms of the traditional esoteric schools, you know, the occult schools, where they used to practice Egyptian magic and gematria, and what they knew as numerology and, let's say, early sacred geometry and that kind of thing, came from the Black Lands. And so it was the connotation was that these sacred sciences are the black arts, but not necessarily because of the negative connotations that we currently attribute to them, or that, they've kind of come to fame, as, oh, the occult, or what have you. So that's really where it comes from.
Okay, yeah, it's good to know that, because it's easy to think otherwise, right?
Mm-hmm,
So
mm-hmm.
so once
So
I'm sorry, go ahead.
no. So at that point, it was really under Roman conquest, when Rome really started gaining power, that I believe it was Emperor, there were two really, Diocletian and Theodosius, that really began to persecute not only alchemists, but they went on a hunt for all materials that one could consider that can be used in alchemy, including herbs, minerals, metals, that sort of thing, especially base metals. And they began destroying them. Uh, and that includes also the like tomes, and this compendium of knowledge that had been acquired, including that in the Library of Alexandria. So that was involved in that massive Roman sack, where they burned the stuff and destroyed the stuff. And largely it was because the concept of the philosopher's stone, which could multiply, you could essentially, yeah, like the theory is, okay, you can turn a base metal, like, whether it's lead or tin or even mercury, into a noble metal, which in this case we could consider silver or gold. Even in the periodic table elements, whatever, they're called the noble elements. So, or the noble metals. So if you can do that as an alchemist, if one alchemist could do that, and Jesus, out of a block of lead, you can not only turn that, say, that kilogram of lead into gold, and you could also use it's called the projection powder of multiplication. You could, basically increase the volume of that. So now you've got, a ton of it. You've got a massive pallet full of gold bullion. Needless to say, the emperors were like, dude, a single alchemist could raise an army. They could basically pay soldiers and raise an army against Rome. So, that was the perceptive power of alchemy, like back in those days. And that's really where the persecutions began. And so, yeah,
Imagine
mystery schools went underground. Huh? Go ahead.
imagine if today we utilized that and implemented that to replace the banking and Federal Reserve. They would react in much the same way, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, I've thought plenty about the how alchemy is far more than tinkering. Like, in a sense, I look at what scientists are doing. Like when you look at let's say, skunk works and their philosophy. Skunk works is basically like I don't want to call it an offshoot, but it's sort of like a nor is it top secret, but it is a very elite aspect of, I think it's Lockheed Martin, and the types of things that the individuals that work in there discuss, just in terms of not just thought experiments, but trying to really bend reality in terms of, like pushing oneself in terms of solving scientific problems to do the impossible and to actually make it scientific fact. Um, that's the type of endeavor that I wish a lot of people would, many people who are involved in spiritual pursuits and occult pursuits would go into. So I mean, I'm glad you discussed that, because most people think, oh, okay, alchemy, it's a hobby. It's like, fuck no, it really isn't meant to just be a hobby. There's such power in it that, as far as I've seen, that if we can just use, or if we can really dive deep into it, Lord knows the types of things that we can, how do you call it? Like, exhume from the past and also discover, and discover anew. And largely I say that because, I think of Einstein, for example, and what's interesting about this alchemy stuff, and you'd mentioned the whole, like, okay, there's the practical alchemy and there's the inner alchemy. And it's like, if we kind of reduce it, or if we want to call, like, if we belittle it in a sense. We can think, oh, okay, well, cool. Alchemy is a hobby, and inner alchemy is more like, you know, auto, like just therapy on myself, because that's just the psychological aspect of, let's say, outer alchemy, which is the laboratory alchemy. And it's like, when we could see it in that way, but now comparing it to, say, Einstein, for example, who many scientists say that he made a thought experiment, right, where he actually envisioned, and he discusses it, um, about placing himself atop of a ray of light, and from there, his theories on relativity, general and special, changed the goddamn paradigm of science. So if individuals that are involved in spirituality or spiritual pursuits, and especially the types of spiritual pursuits that have practical application, which is essentially what we're trying to do with alchemy. Alchemy isn't just metaphysics. It's not just like a bunch of how do you call it, abstract ideas that we're trying to cobble together into, like, in order to better understand this nether world that we call the spiritual world. It's more so a discovery of several principles and applying them in the real world. And so what alchemy tries to do, practical laboratory alchemy, is see the pattern over and over in order to prove to ourselves that these metaphysical, that the hermetic philosophy, so to speak, and these hermetic laws that have been with us for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, just, being given from one civilization to another and that sort of thing, have actual truth in them. And that's what practical alchemy tries to do. It tries to prove the theory. It's kind of like what engineering, because I remember when I was back in college and stuff, a lot of times I would hear my professors say, well, engineering is really just trying to prove the physics. That's what really engineering is. Granted, you have theoretical physics and you have applicative physics. But engineering in and of itself is taking all of those abstract numbers and concretizing them, anchoring them in the real world to make real stuff. And that parallel also applies to alchemy and the Hermetic philosophy. Damn, I just like went off on an offshoot. Like, my bad.
Tangent. It's okay. We're all tangent people in this group here.
Okay. My bad.
Yeah, but no, you were talking about, because we went from the whole lead to gold, right? The original belief or understanding or what people know about alchemy, which is very limited.
Yeah.
But the practical alchemy and what you have been practicing is more on the medicinal side, right? Like in terms of healing and finding potent or creating your own potent medicines. So that brings to mind the difference, I guess, even though they appear different, but they work synchronously, right? Inner alchemy and practical alchemy, where you can do the inner alchemy without practical alchemy, but when you do practical alchemy, the inner alchemy comes in by default, right?
It doesn't necessarily come in by default, so to speak. You actually have to make the effort, and because they're counterparts, right?
Yeah, that's what I mean. You have to implement it, but sorry, that's what I meant.
Okay.
So if you want to talk about that, it's super interesting.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we talk about practical alchemy, you can think of a mere chemistry lab. You've got glassware, beakers, boiling flasks, stuff like that. Measuring spoons, like you name it. It looks like a normal lab, nothing mystical about it, like whatsoever. And that's what you would call laboratory alchemy or practical alchemy. You're about to undertake. It's undertaking the pursuit of working with physical materials in order to do something with them. Like a college chem class. So no, nothing special about it. Now, inner alchemy. It's always been there. It's always, for those, it's always been part of the alchemical tradition as far as I've seen. But therein lies the difference between an alchemist who applies inner alchemy, which I'll like elaborate on what it is, versus just a chemistry student. Now, what inner alchemy is really it's a psychological pursuit, and by that, it's a series of meditations and contemplations. So that's what I think like tends to make it difficult, even for individuals that practice alchemy, even myself, because it entails having a yogic practice, a practice of meditation wherein you go in, you go within, you take 15 minutes, 20 minutes, whatever, and you find a space, and you try to replicate what's going on in your flask or in the distillation apparatus or in the fermentation vessel or whatever, and you're trying to replicate that within yourself. Now, sort of, there's kind of an example, because the question would be like, why would we do that, right? And I remember one day that I was walking around my room cleaning up, and all of a sudden I felt like I was being watched, right? I'm like, dude, this is strange. And if anyone's felt that way, had that kind of intimation in the past, it's something that you really can't shake. You might forget about it. You might think, well, it's just my mind playing tricks on me. It wasn't exactly like, I'm not used to being in my room. There was nothing really special about it. But when I got to my closet, I opened it up, and my eyes were just riveted on 3 jars of water that I had. It's like, 3 half gallons of water that I had laid out on a shelf in my closet. And so those 3 jars are basically jars of rainwater that I had been working on damn near every day. And by working on, I mean meditating with, just setting them in front of a table and going into a 15-20 minute meditation with them. And essentially what had happened was that I created a link. And by a link, the process of creating a link was, and that's what I mean about replicating a process, a specific process, something that's going on with the materials that you're working with. You're replicating them within. And so if anyone knows or if anyone happens to remember, or if you happen to remember the process of the water cycle, it's like the process of precipitation, evaporation, condensation, and it's like a cycle.
Right.
And so since I had gathered that rainwater, it was like a gallon and a half of rainwater, I decided to perceive myself as a water drop, if not as many water drops. And it sounds kind of, childish in a way at first, but once again, the power in it, or at least the power that one is trying to get to is why I gave the example of Einstein on his ray of light. Because he's the first one that said, imagination is more important than knowledge. Because imagination encircles the world. It's not the right. Universe in and of itself.
Where knowledge is limited.
Right. Where knowledge is limited. So, or like Nikola Tesla. Huh?
And I'm sorry to interrupt, but it's really not so woo as people would say, because it's been proven that water takes programming. You can charge water, whether it's with happiness or joy or sadness or toxic feelings. Wasn't that a Japanese? I can't remember his name.
I can't remember either, but yeah.
Yeah. So obviously water is a receptor and a conductor. So it's definitely, a thing.
Yeah, so, no, there's definitely something to it. And really just the process of itself, because again, this links back to the whole why inner alchemy, why do this thing? When one thinks of psychology, like we tend to think, all right, it's just going to stay inside. It's not really going to go anywhere. It might transform you. You might get more sensitivity. You might be developing or honing your intuition, which in and of itself is part of this, is part of the path, so to speak, the spiritual path. Having the ability to create magical actions at will, rather than just, I remember when I was 9 and I, foresaw the future. Those are things that happen to us. But how do we actually begin to cultivate these, this phenomena, these things that individuals have been talking about for fucking millennia? Can we actually do it? And so anyway, I took the time, or again, over a period of 3 months, to link with this, with these three water jars. And what ended up happening, I finally, it hit me. I was like, well, these jars are almost like my children. And why I felt that way is because they had been observing me, kind of like when if anyone's got children and you tell them, do as I say, not as I do. It's like, okay, they're going to kind of do that, but eventually children are going to take on habits of their parents. And so I noticed that these three jars they were observing me as if I was a parent. And I had formed a sort of link to them. Now, how far I can take these three jars, because actually when you work with water, just water, rainwater, especially water that's accumulated in a thunderstorm in particular, you can you eventually discover things called the gur, the alkahest, that sort of thing, which I'm not gonna go into. But creating the link to the materials that you're working with via doing inner alchemy is similar to what, say, Newton was doing when he underwent a period of 20 years in his dorm trying to figure out calculus, inventing calculus. He became one with or Nikola Tesla, for example. That Nikola Tesla, he would think of a machine and he would run it in his mind for weeks on end, and then he would revisit the machine still running in his mind and look at how the gears, what if there was wear on the gears, on the belts, that sort of thing. So again, these are far more, so inner alchemy is far more using the creative imagination than just, like I say, like skipping across a meadow, making believe. It's far more than that. And so inner alchemy, when we think of all of these, what we call processes, and excuse me if I'm being long-winded about it or emphasizing certain things, but basically what we're doing, what we're doing is, as we undergo a process, for example, a process means, let's say anybody who's into winemaking or beer making or whatever, if you put plant matter inside a bucket and you just leave it there, you might add a little bit of yeast, a little bit of sugar, and what comes out of it, you eventually get alcohol through a process of fermentation. That's what's called fermentation. Well, the fermentation process is a process in alchemy. So you can, on the one hand, the laboratory alchemist would be like, all right, I'm just going to chuck a bunch of plant material in a bucket and just let it do its thing. But the alchemist that is interested in evolving with the material which is slowly being generated into an actual medicine which you take, he's saying, all right, what does the process of fermentation feel like? So he actually takes 10, 15 minutes, 20 minutes, an hour, however long, and feels through the process of a fermentation and undergoes, for example, the breakdown, if you want to call it that. Well, what would it feel like to actually dissolve my own ego? And it doesn't sound too far-fetched if, for example, you've smoked too much weed or you've taken magic mushrooms. Anyone that's hit a level 4 or something like that you start noticing the dissolution of your own ego and been freaked out about it.
That's when people freak out because they're not used to being detached from that sense of I am, and being
right.
So.
Yeah. From your ego or your identity, and so you start.
I'm sorry, it's not different. It may be different, but it's along the lines of shadow work, really, right? When you're doing that inner alchemy at the same time as creating the Spagyrics, right? Which are the formulas, the medicines.
Yeah, exactly. For anyone who's familiar with the concept of shadow work or one's dark night of the soul, it's very typical to enter that not only at the beginning of one's spiritual path. I entered mine when I was like 17, wherein you begin to, you're reaching for the light, and all of a sudden, in order to, because there's this emphasis on wanting to become a better person, automatically you begin to reflect on yourself and your motives and what you're thinking. It's like you begin to become introspective, and automatically, while you're reaching out for the light, you enter the depths, and that those depths are what in alchemy are known as the negredo, or the black phase, right? And so the black phase oftentimes occurs in the fermentation. Most of times, in these alchemical, in any alchemical experiment, you begin with what's known as a putrefaction. That's the word that I couldn't think of. A putrefaction, which is a breaking down. It could be a fermentation or what's called a mastication. Basically, what it is just a breaking down of the plant matter. And you think, all right, well, what does that mean? What it is a death. You're placing your material in into a sacred death. And if you decide to undergo the inner alchemical aspect of it, what you do is that you yourself undergo a sort of death. You commit to allowing sort of unwanted and therefore things that merit dying, so to speak, aspects of yourself, which it could be neuroses, particular,
which is never an easy
like
process. It's not
no,
a
it isn't.
process,
No.
And again, the ego has to be released to be able to do that. The over attachment to ego prevents any kind of shadow work and really getting any job done. But anyway, go ahead. I don't want to interrupt.
Yeah. No. I'm glad like you interject, because I feel like I'm talking too much and I want to get to the alchemy, but all this stuff is so important to getting toward the alchemy. It's very much sewn into it. But at any rate, so when you yourself are undergoing a fermentation process, yes, you can feel yourself like releasing gases. For example, you can sink into a meditation. You go into an alpha state. Anyone who's meditated kind of knows when you start feeling, it's almost like you're slowly falling asleep. Like there's similarities there because you're entering the alpha state.
Yeah, that kind of state from awake and asleep.
Right.
But you're still conscious.
Yes. And so you begin to use your creative imagination. That it's like, okay, what does it feel like if I was dipped in a solvent, say of alcohol or water, and I was left in this almost like mother's womb kind of floating, and this solvent began kind of tearing me apart. And it's a sort of fractionating kind of feeling, you know what I mean? And essentially what you're doing is beginning to separate yourself slowly. Separate yourself, separate separate the several sub-personalities and that sort of thing. It doesn't necessarily have to be that deep, but let's just say you want to undergo a fermentation process and you're like, all right, dude, if I was a piece of rosemary and I was thrown into a vat and I was left there for a month, what would it feel like for this thing to be eating at my tissues, eating me all the way into my psyche, tearing my emotional drives, my passions apart, and turning it into a big old mash, whereby I'm releasing all of these gases, because in a fermentation, there's also gases that are produced, and all that sort of thing. What would happen, right? Well, really what's happening is that you're honoring and you are sort of becoming one, so to speak, or you're undergoing or replicating the process of what's going inside the vat. At that point, you might very well enter that's called entering the grado stage, where everything is black and nasty and that sort of thing. So now let's kind of jump into the three essentials, because it's almost like, well, what are we doing with alchemy, right? So let's say you take a handful of rosemary. What are we trying to extract from it? What are we trying to do with it? What's our end goal? And what we're trying to do is create something called a spagyric. And the word spagyric was really coined by Paracelsus, and it comes from the two words known as spau and gyria. So spau means to separate, and gyria means to recombine. Now, what we're doing in that separating and recombining, and in the middle of those two, we're actually purifying them. So it's a process called rectification. essentially what we're trying to do is get down to the three main essences of a plant, what they call the three essentials. One is a liquor, right? Like, I don't know if anyone's heard of the three terms, the mercury, the sulfur, and the salt, right? So the mercury, let me see if I think I've got some here. So the mercury, just to demystify it, is really nothing but an alcohol. See, and it's what's represented as the spirit, which is why alcohol to this day are called like neutral spirits or spirits, right? So this is what the alchemists, which is simple alcohol derived that comes out of pretty much any plant. The mercury is alcohol. So the sulfur is what's known as the essential oil. Let me see if I've got some here. So the sulfur is known as the essential oil and oiliness. So, if I were to close anybody's eyes and I would put a vial of, let's say, essential oil of garlic in one and essential oil of cinnamon in the other, anybody can immediately distinguish the difference. It says something about the plant. So the essential oil or the sulfur, the alchemical sulfur, is really the personality of the plant, the distinctive personality of the plant, whereby you can tell one from the other, as opposed to the alcohol. The alcohol, it's a clear spirit, so you can't tell whether you got it from, lemon balm, or you got it from cardamom or curry or whatever the case may be. So
they all produce alcohol.
They all produce alcohol. You can draw alcohol. Granted, some of them more so than others.
Right.
And it's actually very, very, very minimal, because even in terms of essential oils, you could have a plant that has a high essential oil content, and you would have to distill, say, a pound, 2 pounds, anywhere between 1 to 5 pounds, and you get a tiny amount, tiny vials.
When I was doing the perfumery, as you remember, to extract an ounce of rose oil, it takes about 60,000 blooms.
60,000 blooms, that's right.
For 1 ounce, which is a little bottle like this. That's why it's so expensive.
That's why it's so expensive. Exactly.
So different plant materials will render different amounts, for sure.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Some like I think it's juniper, caraway, really, really high amounts, as opposed to, say, aloe. Aloe is mainly water, so you get a tiny, tiny, tiny amount and a tiny amount of salts. Salts are a third essential, the third component. And what it is really like what we would consider the body of the plant. I think I've got some salts here to show everyone. So basically, I'll just show you guys here. They look a little, let me see, because I can't quite see myself.
Like gray.
They look grayish here because I haven't purified them yet. And this is garlic salts. So these salts was basically just a bunch of chopped up garlic that I lit on fire, and I ran through what they call a calcination process, which is like when you cremate a body, you just blast it under heavy, heavy fire, and it's supposed to turn any plant material, from a black to a gray and eventually to a white. And as you can see, you start off at a negredo, because it looks like coal. Because even then, even the sub processes that you're doing to each component undergoes a negredo and negredo, albedo, and rubedo phase. But anyway, so going back to what it is, what's the point of alchemy? It's that we're extracting these three things. We're extracting an alcohol, an essential oil, and crystals. Really, that's what they are. They're crystals. You can't see them right now, but if I were to add distilled water to this and let the distilled water evaporate, it's almost like those crystal growing kits for kids and stuff. The crystals would grow bigger, right? So now we've got what are known as the three essentials, or you could call them like three immortals, so to speak, of our plant. So what have we done? So through this process of separation, okay, and it's like, well, how do you get the alcohol? How do you get the well, the alcohol we already discussed was through a fermentation process, right? Which is very similar to beer or winemaking. You
The
can do that with
essential
grapes
oil,
or hops or whatever.
I guess through
Huh?
the essential oil, I guess through distillation.
Exactly. Exactly. You take the plant matter. If I were to take some rosemary and I'd put it in what's known as a distillation apparatus, which just looks like a bunch of glassware wherein you have a boiling flask here, you have a condenser here, which basically condenses or turns the hot vapors that are coming over. It turns them into liquid again. They run through a tube and then they drop into another little receiving flask. So that's all you're doing. It's like disappearing from one, and essentially the water is carrying these essential oils and dumping them into the other. So that's our essential oil that's mixed with water. Eventually, we will try to separate the water from the essential oil, and that's what's called the rectification or the purification, because you want the essential oil to be as pure as possible, much like you want your alcohol to be as pure as possible. You know how when you get like Everclear, that's maybe 153 proof or 190 proof. Like, what does that mean? Like when you have a certain alcohol level, it's like, okay, 14% alcohol or 80% alcohol. It's because the remainder of it is water. And so in alchemy, what you're trying to do is separate the water from the alcohol as well in order to get that essential, our mercury in this case, or our sulfur, which is the essential oil, as pure as possible. So we want to get rid of that water. With the salt, well, you think, all right, we just burn the hell out of a plant. There's no way it's got water in it. It's like, well, no, it's quite dry, but you want to get it as white as possible. So you're trying to rectify, so to speak, you're trying to purify the salt to take it from black to white. So you have to add water to it in order for it to essentially the water acts as a further, it's like a solvent that further separates, and you can extract, say with a syringe or what have you, or even through a filter paper, where you get clearer and clearer liquid. And once the liquid evaporates, you end up with the crystal body of the plant, the true body of the plant. So now we've got our three essentials. Once again, we've got our alcohol, we've got our essential oil, and we've got our crystals, which is equivalent to the mercury, the sulfur, and the salt, at least, in the herbal kingdom. So it's like, all right, they're separated. They've been rectified or purified. What now? So that's when you undergo a process of coabation. And that's the gidia part of Spagyria. Now it's time to put them back together. And that is considered a sort of, you're resurrecting the body, because you're re-imbuing these crystals with a spirit and a soul. And that's essentially what becomes our new, what they call a living medicine, right? And it undergoes a process of coabation. And simple process is, like let's say you happen to put your essential oil in your flask or in your reservoir of alcohol. All right, cool. You've united spirit and soul. So you would just basically take your body, you'd scrape it, and then you dump it right into it. That does change the electrical conductivity of the tincture, and it's what makes a spagyric medicine very different than the tinctures that they sell, say, at Whole Foods. Because those tinctures only have alcohol and essential oil, which in and of itself do have health benefits, but the addition of the plant, that's like the third, it's like a cornerstone. It's like the third pillar of it. It adds certain properties whereby it bypasses the metabolic process in the body, like in your body, that sometimes, when you take those tinctures, your body may reject certain things and not others. It may send others to, the digestive factories and that sort of thing, and allow other nutrients to actually do their thing. With spagyrics, the addition of the salt multiplies their power, tenfold, 100-fold. We don't necessarily know, like depending on technique, how far we can take these tinctures. And that's another reason why not only herbal tinctures like traditional herbalism, but spagyrics, a few drops of the stuff is equivalent to drinking a gallon, 2 gallons of tea, because it's all hyper concentrated. Never mind taking a half teaspoon of the stuff. But that's really what separates spagyrics with that. So you could make medicines, by the way, without doing the inner alchemy, but the inner alchemy acts as sort of like an extra gear in the auto regenerative machine of your own spiritual evolution. You know what I mean? Because it's almost like, okay, you're basically taking an herb and you're making a medicine, which yourself are going to take. So it almost seems like a Ouroboros. You know what I'm saying? Like you're taking the medicine. But when you add all of this psychological and even astrological aspects, the more you pump it with energy, the greater the effects, because it's not just meant to affect you, physically. For example, like, yeah, you're going to experience something when you take a spagyric. Like, definitely, you take oil of egg. You and I, we've taken the redstone. That is in
the redstone. Love
the redstone.
Gives you visuals like nobody's business. It's amazing.
Yeah, and it gives you hard dreams, man. Like,
I couldn't believe it. I was like, wow, this is really potent. And it was like a couple drops. I remember you didn't give me very much. It was, I don't know, maybe 4 or 5 drops or something. 3.
Yeah, if that. I think I just gave you 3.
3, and I was getting crazy visuals, like with my eyes open. It was. I was not expecting that.
Right. And that's what's interesting about this stuff, that it goes far beyond, like, really, it's almost like traditional Chinese medicine, that they're trying to affect the meridians, and they're very, very, they focus a lot on energy and opening up the nadis, what they call them, certain energy centers, and even your own psycho-spiritual centers, which I guess we can call the chakric centers. But we're essentially trying to dig down deep into the psyche, our psychic stuff, and really trying to evolve it. And that's why it's a sort of like, it's very holistic when you unite laboratory alchemy, which otherwise it would seem like a chemistry 101 lab that a freshman would take, versus a balls to the wall, balls deep, full on commitment to excavating your own psyche. Like, there's a big difference. There's a world of difference. And you could see it just undergoing one cycle. Just take chamomile and go through a spagyric process, which takes 6 weeks to 8 weeks, 2 months from beginning to end, two lousy months. You take it from one end to the other, and you actually put everything you have into it. You're going to notice definite differences, even in your own, like, psychological makeup. And never mind when you actually take the medicine that you yourself, have been trying to evolve, because that's what you're doing. You're taking a what otherwise would be a crude plant, and you're breaking it down to its essentials. To the essentials that we can actually manipulate, you know what I mean? Because obviously you can continue breaking the thing down till it's, just neutrons, but what use is that unless you chuck it into a hadron collider or whatever?
Is that the quintessence, or is the quintessence the end product?
No, the quintessence is different. You can get the quintessence versus via there's another process called the ends process. And that in and of itself, at least to me, would be like evoking, like a magician evoking the spirit of the herb, like the central spirit of the herb. And so it's still a tincture, it's still a medicine that you take, but you use what's known as a different menstruum or a different solvent. You just don't use alcohol or water. It's like, it's a mixture of something called the vegetable radical menstruum. So there's different ways of doing that. But essentially, yeah, what you are trying to get to is the quintessence, so to speak, of the plant, even though the quintessence is nomenclature for another process altogether. But that is the point. Yeah. So you're kind of trying to break the plant down to its immortals. And that's one reason why these spagyric tinctures, they actually get better with age, given that you don't leave them out under the sun or somewhere where UV rays can, actually destroy it. But no,
And
you
heat,
leave it out.
I would imagine heat also, because they might volatilize
Yeah.
at a certain temperature, have a certain flash point where they
Over a certain, well, especially, yeah, or evaporate if you have them, in an open container, however. But even then, you can leave them in a relatively warm place. Like they can take some temperature fluctuations, because even during a digestion, like for example, when I add these garlic salts to the garlic spagyric, they still have to marry over a period of 2 weeks. You can take it immediately, but you want everything to combine, so you swirl it around, and during that time you put it in what's known as a digester, or a digestive process, which is an incubation. So it's very similar to like hatching chicken eggs and stuff like that. You put them in very, very low warmth, and so that doesn't destroy it. Indeed, it allows for the mixture to circulate and kind of do its thing, and for things to, like I say, marry and come together. So,
and
mhm.
no, go ahead. I'm sorry.
No, it's time for a question.
Okay. Shit, I forgot what I was gonna ask. I think we have some. Wait, let me see. I think I saw some questions in the chat. Let me see if I find any that you
I
might.
hope I hope I can feel them.
Oh, hold on. Bird Dog wants to know if you can show your lab or workstation. Let's see.
I can show the closet where I have all my distillation apparatus or whatever. Because right now, yeah, they're largely, well, I can show you. I use a lot of mason jars, but I do have a lot of apparatus. But since I'm not distilling anything right now, that's the reason why it's all picked up. But yeah.
Plus, you're packing, ready to go somewhere else. So
That what?
because you're also kind of packing and getting ready to move somewhere else.
Oh yeah, yeah. Let me see if I can show you this then.
I know you have a bunch of glassware.
Yeah. So these really are just, simple. Those are really the mason jars that I use for the simple spagyrics, and just glass bottles. But if you want to see the actual, like, all the distillation stuff, let me see if I can.
Sorry, I should have
shown my room to the
planned
world.
this before. Show your mess.
Yeah. So I don't know if you can see anything up there.
It's kind of dark, but yeah, there's stuff, flasks and things, and it's okay. It's not too difficult. Maybe next time.
Right. Cool. Yeah.
So, for those who might think this is a placebo effect, right? Because there's always that doubt in people. I remember you telling me a story. I think it was your teacher, Robert, who there was a horse that was injured or was sick or something. What was that? And what I don't remember what he gave him, if it was antimony or.
Yeah, he had done a mixture of antimony and I believe oil of egg. Antimony is another. It's actually an ore. It comes from stibnite.
Because it's toxic in its natural state, right?
Yeah, it's definitely toxic. And some of these ores that you work with might have arsenic and that sort of thing, but obviously you use certain techniques in order to get rid of all that stuff. But yeah, he used some oil of antimony because the horse had gotten a very deep gash, and so it was like a slab of meat that had gotten infected, like really badly infected. I forgot if it was on his side or on his face or something. But evidently he used, like they had taken it to a vet, not him, but it was a neighbor who had the horse. And since he's kind of known on his mountain as, being an alchemist and all that, and they brought him the horse to see if he could possibly do anything. So yeah, he took some of that antimony and it mixed it with this stuff called oil of egg, that you use egg yolks and stuff like that with in order to make, a yolk, which naturopath in Canada uses for burn victims, basically, with very good results. And so he mixed those two up, and he, slathered that gash, and it actually ended up not only almost immediately reducing the inflammation, because some of this stuff is so powerful, it within minutes sometimes you'll notice a massive difference. It treats it. It's almost like taking an Aleve when you've got like kidney stones, really. And that's why I make these parallels, that it's like, with herbalism, that it's like, well, a lot of people avoid herbalism because it's like, oh, okay, in 30 days or in 45 days, I may experience something. It's good preventative if I take a little bit of echinacea. But I'm talking about generating the hydrogen bomb of medicines that are equivalent to taking, 500 milligrams of like prescribed Tylenol, like morphine, like that sort of thing. Like that's really the stuff that I'm interested in doing, like miraculous medicine from herbs, and herbs in and of itself, like white willow bark, St. John's wort, doing stuff, making spagyrics out of those, what would the effects be? And also to have enough burgeoning alchemists that decide, much like at Johns Hopkins University or Harvard University, to be able to get funding and have a population sample of 200, 300, 500 individuals that you can actually do case studies on. And goddamn, finally we've got some documentation. Finally we can see patterns. Finally we can run analyses on these things. You know what I mean?
Big try to shut that shit down real quick. It's like crypto. We have crypto money.
True. Yeah.
But in the meantime.
But going back to what with when you apply these things, when you give these things to animals, there is no placebo effect, because it either works or it doesn't.
Right.
And that's what's really cool about this. Robert had mentioned another instance, and excuse me, because I completely forgot there's a disease that affects rabbits, which is actually incurable. And his wife, Karen, she happens to breed rabbits. Like, they actually live on a farm, and they got tons of animals. And they cured that otherwise incurable disease, to the point that when she mentioned that, using antimony, I believe it was antimony, I cured this otherwise incurable disease, she was actually booted from the forum, from the rabbit forum, because they were like, no, you're talking nonsense. And evidently it happened. Granted, a lot of these things, and that's probably why sometimes we've been talking, like when we talk, I sometimes express a little bit of frustration, because it's anecdotal. We don't have 3,500 years of traditional Chinese medicine that was like, it was encouraged. Oh, okay, yeah, sure. Work on meridians, work with acupuncture, work with herbs. We're not going to persecute the shit out of you. Instead, we're going to encourage you to continue developing this medical system, which is now being used all around the world. Instead, alchemy had to hush up, go underground. And because of that, after, thousands of manuscripts being burned, and alchemists, it's almost like you had to be careful, like in Cuba, you got to watch out who you tell what, because everyone's enchilado,
Cuba always slips into the conversation.
Always. That was actually unintentional, because we talk about that. I'm like, damn, why do writers always try to slip Cuba in order to get like street cred? It's like, man, y'all are like, y'all have never been to Cuba, and y'all just try to slip it into your movie or into your screenwriting just to seem cool. But anyway, that was totally unintentional. But because of that, there is a lack of manuscripts, or a lack of actual research, where one alchemist, living in Belgium can replicate, using the procedure, in another alchemist's notebook, and actually apply it and give it to many, many patients to see if this stuff isn't only effective, But if it's effective repeatedly, so we can get out of this anecdotal, well, yeah, I gave this oil to this person, I gave oil of tin to so and so. It's almost like, well, that's a coincidence. It's like it's gotten to the point that I certainly feel like this stuff has to go beyond coincidence, or beyond anecdote, because that's what makes it particularly frustrating, especially in the face of a lot of these scientists that, for example, use creative imagination. They almost use similar things that the inner alchemists use, like, again, creative imagination and obsession and linking with their work, again, like Newton with calculus, or Newton with optics, or Nikola Tesla with machinery, or even Stephen Hawking placing himself. I mean, the dude's got Lou Gehrig's disease, sitting in a wheelchair, and yet he's able to place his mind inside a black hole. And he was a prominent scientist, teaching at, what was it, Cambridge or Oxford or whatever. It's like, we need the spiritual people that are involved in spiritual stuff for it to go past just the pixie dust and the damn herbal pillows and stuff like that, like just the yogic stuff, as if it's some sort of like private side interest, side hobby.
Mention get over the smear campaign and the fear around it, because it's occult, which again, occult means nothing but hidden, and the only things that are ever hidden, like I always say, are truths and treasures, right? So all these things
Right.
underground, like astrology, which alchemy completely implements in terms of, you can explain it better, but like the days of the week, the herbs that correspond to certain planets and signs, and all of these things come into play.
Right.
So it takes into account more than the physical aspect of medications, which is what our modern day science uses.
Yeah.
Very ineffectively, really, for the most part. And yeah, no, there's definitely a need for that. And then there's also the bad taste that the name alchemy has left in many people's mouths because of the elite, the Illuminati, that they engage in all these practices. But of course, you use it for, evil purposes and their own gaining of power. And then meantime, the regular people, the everyday people, have lost sight of all of this, and the ability to use these things to our own benefit,
Right. Yeah, absolutely right. Like oftentimes it was, during the Enlightenment, it was really like kings in their court. Partially why this stuff was also considered like the royal art, like some of it was really only taught to royalty. When it doesn't necessarily have to. I mean, anybody can really do it with just a few mason jars and some herbs and stuff, and you could start to really work, with the power inherent in this stuff. But it was kind of relegated to kings and all that. And you think, well, damn, why do the elite get all the fun? Why do the cabal get to, how do you call it? Have, for example, John Dee. John Dee, who was like the court's astronomer,
astrologer. He was the astrologer.
He was the astrologer.
Well, they were together. Astrology and astronomy were one science originally, and then astrology gave too many answers, so they wasn't good for the populace to know too much.
Even Nostradamus. Nostradamus was also the court's astrologer. If you want, I don't think he was really a necromancer per se, but Newton's a very good example. He eventually became head of the treasury, the English treasury, if I'm not mistaken. And when we think Newton, we think, all right, well, whatever, dude. He was, we think of Royal Academy of Sciences, again, calculus, optics, mechanics, F equals ma, all that stuff. But the dude evidently wrote more about alchemy, wrote more words on alchemy than he did on physics and mathematics. And nobody really discusses that. Yeah.
I know that.
Yeah. They've discovered manuscripts. You can probably see some stuff on YouTube. He worked a lot with antimony as well. His workers, meaning you can call them like employees or live-ins, I guess, would talk about that he would keep his furnaces lit all night, which is, very, very, it's central to depicting an alchemist. you know, because you're working through the night, keeping your fires burning and hot enough in order to melt your metals and create ores and stuff like that. I'm sorry, melt ores and all that. So even Francis Boyle, you know, who was the famous, he was like the father of modern chemistry. Uh, they used to actually correspond and stuff about alchemy. And mind you, these guys are at the top of the heap, and yet they still obviously would keep it secret. And of course, you know, Francis Boyle came out with The Skeptical Chemist, and really established like a standardized version of, if you want to call it, chemistry. So that's when the split between chemistry and alchemy really became legitimized, you know, at that point and official. Um, but my point being is that you have all of these individuals who are like the who's who. They're working on this stuff, and yet, you know, by the same token, you have this, if you want to call it like current scientific intelligentsia, taking a shit on top of all of this, well, astrology and alchemy. It's like, dude, the founders of your science, you know, the founders of your empire, your shepherds used to study this shit.
Which now their science has become their religion, which is kind of laughable because few gods are more blindside, have more blinders on and blind spots.
Right.
But anyway.
Right.
Just real quick, Rye Guy has a question. He wanted to know, wait, because I can't see without my glasses on the phone. He wants to know what the red stone is that we were talking about earlier.
The red stone is like
Hi, Hans. It's cool to see everyone here. I'm sorry. I haven't given a shout out to Money Bob, Not Bob, Hans, Zeno, Rye Guy, the Blue Crew's in the house. I love these guys. All right. Sorry. Go ahead. Yeah. If you wanna talk a little bit about the red stone. It's fantastic, Rye Guy.
The red stone is the closest thing we have to the famous Philosopher's Stone. And the Philosopher's Stone was really originally used to that's what, you know, even with Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone or whatever, they're actually referring to an actual physical, it's a stone, it's like a hard rock, but essentially you use it in order to multiply metals. However, out of the stone, out of the Philosopher's Stone, you can, if you dip it into, say, water, you get what's known as the elixir of life. And that's what extends your life or gives you immortality. So this red stone essentially is the closest thing we have to it, which is really antimony, like oil of antimony, which comes from this ore called stibnite, and oil of gold, which comes from gold. So there are reasons why they tend to say that, for example, the metals themselves are undergoing an evolution of their own, and gold is the pinnacle. And the question is, well, is there anything that can exalt or take gold even higher? And it's that ore called antimony. So when you unite the two, essentially, you know, you have to undergo, like, it's like something called the acetate path or whatever, but you basically use these other alchemical methods within the metallic kingdom. Because right now we've been talking about the herbal kingdom, since we've been dealing with herbs, mainly talking about herbs. But in the metallic kingdom, you use a few different processes. And eventually, when you get this oil of gold, which you get from gold, and oil of antimony, which you get from stibnite, and you unite them, you marry them in a canoe show and do all that stuff, you end up, after some length of time, into what is called the red stone, which again is the closest thing we have to the Philosopher's Stone. Now, whether or not, some of these metallic stones can actually turn lead into gold, or actually give a person, the ability to live 30,000 years. I've really yet to see, maybe because it's one of those things that there's not enough research. Maybe there's a stray alchemist who's been doing this stuff for 50 years plus or something, and all of a sudden came across, has the answers to be able to do something like that. But to answer your question, that's what it is. And it's a little bottle of this stuff, it's like a tincture.
Yeah, it's a liquid. I'm wondering, because since so many things in alchemy are symbolic, like all the symbols that are used instead of writings for what the procedures are, you have the planet symbols, and you have the king and the queen, and you have all these different symbols that seem super obscure and no, it seems very occult and shifty, right? But was that a result of it having to go underground, or was it more like a shorthand kind of thing to be able to get all this information just with little bits, or
It's
um
both.
both?
As far like from my experience, and I'm sorry I didn't let you finish.
No, I finished. Okay.
Okay. It's really both. Because what's really interesting about these about uh, working with alchemy is that you're given visions and intimations and, excuse me, dreams, and in those dreams there's always images. And if you're into dream interpretation, especially your own dreams, because obviously whenever you see an image, it all relates to your experience with it, in connection to what you would call like collectively what that image might mean across like a population or whatever, within your culture, that
Right.
sort of thing. So it acts both ways. But um, for example, when I was undergoing the Negredo phase, um, uh, I hit a very deep, dark, black place, and this was like with my first experiment with chamomile, and I knew that the cycle had transitioned. In other words, I knew that I was coming out of something. I had hit a bottom, and it was now beginning to reverse, or find its way up and out of it. When all of a sudden I closed my eyes, I was going to bed, and I closed my eyes, and I saw a white goddess, like in a white gown. And I wasn't necessarily thinking of that, but it was a sort of like I knew, because when when we when we debate whether or not the things that we get are either auto-generated thoughts, like, oh, that's just my head, that's just me,
My
as
imagination.
opposed
Yeah.
to, right, it's just really a random something, a random variable
Right.
that went off in my head, as opposed to something with real meaning and significance,
Right.
that kicks off in your mind. That hit me as a full body feeling, and it was something I wasn't even remotely thinking about, that immediately told me, okay, I'm going on to the next phase. So my point being is that alchemists all throughout history um, saw things such as birds, hummingbirds, peacocks, um, eggs, uh, um, salamanders, king, queen, that sort of thing. They all happen to have this archetypal significance that told, because you could be following something by the book, but again, this isn't like I say, walking into your chem lab and you know that a certain process is going to happen within the next 22 minutes. Um, that's not the case with this stuff. It's very cyclical, and it's very slow moving, and kind of the medicine behaves and transform, your materials transform on their own terms. And so when you create that link, what ends up happening is that it's almost as if you're tapping into this collective reservoir of universal symbols, so to speak, that have been applied to alchemy, and that are just kind of like in the nether realm. And so the work is speaking back to you through them. Now, in terms of the symbols and why alchemists have used them, and why sometimes there are, I don't want to call them contradictory symbols, even though you see that a lot in metaphysics, just in general. A lot of times, since alchemists were working in secret, because often it's there's a lot of solitude in it. You're kind of working as the lone hierophant. Um, as you're undergoing, because you might have manuscripts, documents, a papyrus or whatever, with some old alchemist's handwriting, but by the same token, you're still undergoing this special, very individual process. You're using your own coded language. So the codes sometimes are similar, sometimes are slightly different, maybe altered. There's some that are pretty universal, salt, sulfur, and mercury, maybe the symbols for the planets. They've pretty much been used. Here and there, you might see a glyph changed, flipped upside down, that sort of thing. And that can fluctuate from alchemist to alchemist, not to mention that because even alchemy became Christianized, which is really what Rosicrucianism, what happened there. Um, they began to use Christian symbology and Christian images and stuff like that in order to code their language and to sort of like, como se dice, amortiguar la cosa, kind of buffer, the blow of, oh, okay, he's more like a Christian mystic rather than a full blown alchemist. So yeah, people kept disguising stuff, but all the same, there was this undercurrent of, like I say, of this vast biosphere of symbolic imagery that the alchemist is being bombarded by, and sometimes not, but sometimes it's like a flash of insight, a flash of brilliance, a muse that just happens to whack you with something. You're struck with something that is significant, and it's time for a change, or that some sort of change has happened within what they call the glass coffin, within your flask or within yourself.
Right. Because what's happening within is happening without.
Exactly. Yeah. As above, so below, typical Hermetic philosophy.
Hans has a question. He's asking, does it work the same like wearing copper or drinking water from a copper cup, or do they actually break down the gold to put in medicine?
Yeah, what's interesting, they use something like, what happens with the conversion of gold, you don't really end up with, say, actual gold or actual tin or actual lead in your tinctures. It's called a catalytic conversion that happens. So you're essentially using gold, and yes, you can use copper. For example, Franz Bardone, he also uses, like, let's say you can hyperheat a gold bracelet, or even in what's that liquor called, Goldschlager, that you have actual tiny pieces of gold in it. So yeah, you can drink it, and you're going to experience some how do you call it, some effects, like you say, with copper, wearing a copper bracelet or what have you. There are going to be some medicinal effects. But here, with the actual creating an oil of copper or an oil of iron, oil of tin, oil of gold, that sort of thing, you're actually applying those alchemical principles, those spagyric principles, and using different menstruums to do it. So it's a little bit more complicated. And what you're doing is that you're taking something from a mineral realm,
and the menstruum is the carrier or the medium that you.
Right. A menstruum is the same as what's known as a solvent. So your menstruum, for example, your menstruum when you're making tea is the water, and you put your little bag of like chamomile tea in it. With some of these tinctures, the menstruum might be alcohol or vegetable glycerin. So yeah, totally, it's the solvent. So really, to answer your question, what you're doing is that you're elevating via this process of catalytic conversion. You are elevating, you're chemically treating. If we want to speak technically, what's happening is that you're chemically treating this piece of gold, or piece of iron or piece of lead or whatever. You're chemically treating it in a manner that you are converting the chemical composition of it to make it more comestible, to make it more ingestible for the human. So it's almost like you're evolving it from the metallic mineral realm up to the animal realm, up to the herbal realm, so that then you don't get poisoned if you drink like a cup of lead. So those are really the differences. And there was ways to do it, like I said, via the acetate path, and we call it the dry path versus the wet path. And you use different chemicals, but all the same, you're still applying the same universal alchemical principles to it. You're still going through the process of nigredo, albedo, rubedo. It's still there's still a universality and a cycle to it all, whether you're working in the herbal realm, the animal realm, or the metallic mineral realm, which is really considered like the highest, most hardcore realm. And that's one of the reasons why
the metals.
Yeah, the metals, because you're using a lot higher heat. And when you're working with mercury, you have to be careful with the fumes. You have to work outside. As a matter of fact, the famous Israel Regardie,
or touching it, right, with the mercury,
or touching it. Yeah, some people Yeah, some people, mercury is really weird when it comes to individuals and body chemistry, because some people might not be affected by it. Like some kids, I think it was Dennis Hauck, who's another alchemist, um, talks about playing with it as a kid, just breaking thermometers. And he's like, he has no um, residual ailments due to it, as far as he can see. While other people, yeah, it can kill you. But what I was saying about the vapors, another example is Israel Regardie, the famous Israel Regardie of the Order of the Golden Dawn. He also worked with Frater Albertus, or Albert Riedel's his name, who was my teacher's teacher, right? So later on in his life, I believe he was working with, I don't know if it ended up being antimony or lead that he was cooking outside in a furnace. And he happened to open the pot. They always say to open the pot away from you, open the lid away from you versus toward you. And he inhaled the vapors and it destroyed his lungs. And he was so way up there that there was no sort of like rejuvenant, unfortunately, at that point to really, be able to cure it. So you have to be extraordinarily careful when you're working with the metals, because you can blow up your lab. As it is, if you don't know how to use a distillation apparatus, if you don't have an opening somewhere where it can actually breathe, you're essentially creating a bomb with all of that heat and pressure. If there's no escape, no, no vent, yeah, you could really mess yourself up. So it's still to some degree dangerous chemistry that you're messing with.
Ed wants to know, thanks for answering that. Ed wants to know if you can, or if you can shed some info or know how the Vatican ended up with, was it when, hold on, I can't see. If this practice went to Christianity, when did the Vatican get a hold of it?
Damn, that's actually a good question. Yeah, I really haven't looked into it, to be honest. I didn't even know that they, because I know they have a lot of gold, a lot of art. It's like human heritage is all in there.
A lot of human sacrifice, a lot of hideous things that they do. So they're bound to have that.
I didn't know really that they had maybe alchemical manuscripts, or that they themselves, that's a good point. I'm gonna look further into it. I had no idea.
Go to look it up. Let me see, because somebody else had something to say. Han says, "Wow, thanks for answering, Alfredo. I understand now." Zeno says, tech containing rare minerals used as a bridge for communications gives humanity the ability to send our vibrations in sound and video frequencies across the planet and into space. Let's see, anybody else?
Yeah, that's a good point.
Good to see you, man. It's cool seeing all these guys here. So yeah, man, you've really brought a lot of info. That's really amazing. I know there's so much more, but obviously there's only so much we can cover in one show. But I'd love to have you back on, and maybe we can delve deeper and get some more.
Oh, cool. I mean, I hope I wasn't long-winded, because there's just so much to say about it. And I hope that I at least got to the crux of like what is alchemy, as opposed to going off on tangents like I did. Like I see so many connections at this point between one field and another, including my own frustrations. When I see what the scientists are doing, and as opposed to good-hearted and like noble people that are involved in spiritual pursuits that are unfortunately and it happens to me as well, that you're still flailing on the shallow end of the pool. It's like this thing has depths that we don't even know. And I mean, and I really mean that. And this has been coming from someone that I myself, like I say, and it's not to put it out there and rep or anything like that, but I did undergo 10 years of like hardcore learn as an engineering student. And so the amount of rigor that I see in the sciences, I really want to see in all of these other occult arts and occult sciences. like alchemy, like even, practical magic, evocative magic, and stuff like that. More people getting into it to see what,
Magic with a K,
how
not a
far,
C.
huh?
Magic
Yeah,
with a K.
with a
Yeah.
K, right? Not a C. Yeah, yeah, like the real hardcore stuff, which strangely enough, and it's just like the last thing I want to put out there in case anybody like is interested in practical magic or a system of practical magic. There is an individual called Franz Barden. He was a Czech magician, and he
Didn't the
also,
kill him?
huh?
Didn't the Nazis kill him?
Yeah, yeah. He died in a camp. Exactly. Apparently, he got a really bad. Some people say that he killed himself because he ate some pork or something like that. He was actually jailed post. I'm sorry. He was tortured in a concentration camp, but I don't know if it was the commies that got him later on
They're all
in
the
another
same.
country, and just some people say he suicided himself. Uh, you know,
But
uh,
yeah, he does have a great, or had, or still has a great system of magic.
and the
You introduced me to Bardone years ago, and yeah, I did some of his work, and it's definitely effective. But I know you got way further into it and really, um, you know,
and
made a
largely the
major
reason.
advancement with that. What's that?
Thank you. Yeah, as a matter of fact. Sorry, because sometimes I feel like you're done with your point and I cut in. I'm sorry about that.
No, no, it's
Um,
fine. It's all good. But yeah, man,
but the reason why I bring him up, which really, connects with the subject today, is because his system breaks down the human body, so to speak. Like his series of meditations throughout 10 chapters are breaking the body down into a spirit, a soul, and a body. And essentially, when you're doing your meditations in the Bardone system, you're replicating what it is to undergo an alchemical process, except you're doing it with your senses, with your emotions. And what I mean by your senses, your sense of sight, your sense of smell, vision, all that stuff. You're doing it with your feelings and affectations. The ability to raise your body temperature. Like as if you were angry, for example, by focusing on heat, or making yourself extraordinarily cold by focusing on an icicle or something like that. And then you start working with, on the body level, what they call the vitality, which anybody who's done martial arts will know as the chi, or the vital force, the vital energy. It's all the same thing. The kundalini,
I remember
and
all the breathing exercises with the Bardone system.
the pore breathing, right?
Pore
Yeah,
breathing,
that's basically pore breathing vitality. So you
right?
begin to, it has a very nice parallel with the principles of alchemy, because again, the system is founded on those, or broken down systematically in that way as well. So you can also find connections in that way, and even apply some of those magical applications um, to your alchemy. Some of those meditations to alchemy, which is just hardcore. But anyway, yeah, my battery's running low. I'm not plugged in.
All
Let
right,
me
maybe
just plug in so
the,
we can
the,
bounce.
a good time to wrap it up. We've been talking for about an hour and a half, and I know there's a lot more to cover. Appreciate you guys hanging in there. Hey, Sean, good to see you, man. Uh, Hans asks, is the Vatican just a front for a secret society of black and white magicians who are tinkering with the herds of sheeple?
Oh, damn. I wouldn't doubt it. There's a lot of black lodges out there. I think the Nazis themselves actually were considered a black lodge. I mean, when you think of Hitler, for example, he would touch every flag, as soldiers would come down in order to anoint them. Not to mention the Nazi salute.
Yeah, they were constantly
Which
giving
is
him energy with the right hand. Because
exactly.
yeah, yeah.
You have scores of people that are emotionally elevated. You know what I'm saying?
In a frenzy.
Believing in a cause, in a frenzy, in an emotional frenzy. I mean, Hitler knew he was using the astral body, meaning emotive. How do you call it?
Yeah,
The emotive force,
it's energy.
creative
It's
imagination. Yeah,
charge. Yeah.
exactly, and blasting him with it. I mean, he was the center of attention. So yeah, yeah. I wouldn't doubt what I'm sorry, who was it that said that comment? It's
I
onto
think
something.
it was Hans.
Hans, yeah. I wouldn't put it past them.
And EC had made a comment earlier about the three states of matter and being equal to shit. I hate using reading glasses, but the three states of matter and the modalities, I guess, being similar or the same.
Modalities as in fixed, cardinal, and mutable. Is that what he means?
Maybe. I'm not sure. But something else caught my eye. Right guy came by. He says, Annie, this was great. I don't know why I'm hung up on it, but how can this tie into free radicals in the body? Oh, because he was asking if there's anything I forgot to mention. He was asking earlier if there's anything, any kind of spagyric or alchemical kind of formula that can work on free radicals, I guess, in the body.
I would look at traditional herbalism. Honestly, that's partially what I was telling you, Annie. Traditional herbalism happens to work with herbs that you can even just Google, and that do have scientific backing on working with or let's say trying to I don't think the word avoid free radicals, but neutralize free radicals or whatever. That's what he's talking about, right? In the body. Uh,
Free radicals, yeah, or in the atmosphere that affect the body, or on the skin or inside. I would presumably the free radicals
yeah, and
that
run
you
it through a
take your food.
spirit process. See, these herbs, that's the thing. These herbs already have predisposed uh, um pharmacologic properties. They already have, that you can find in traditional herbalism, that it's like, oh, raspberry leaf works great with this. Uh, what have you. And I know that there are some, because I've come across, that are great at, again, removing free radicals from the body. And then you just run it through the spagyric process to get an even stronger medicine, a stronger tincture. Again, it's really using the materia prima, the prima materia that we have at hand, which are herbs, the
Organic,
herbal kingdom, bark,
organic us though,
fungus,
not
preferably.
stuff
Yeah,
that's did with anything. That would be the
right.
best. Yeah,
And then using that in a spagyric process, because what you're really doing is exalting the product. That's really what I call spagyrics, in alchemy. It's like upgraded herbalism. Herbalism goes way far.
yeah.
Herbalism, Dr. John Christopher, for example, that I was telling you that I'm reading his stuff, out of this world. But then what if we want to kick it up? What if we want to really improve on these traditional methods? Dude, run it through a spagyric process. Uh, if you want to learn a bit more about the spagyric process, yeah, definitely Robert Bartlett. There's a book by Manfred Junius, I believe, that's called The Practical Handbook of Plant Alchemy. I would look at that as well to gain a handle on it. But the methods are pretty simple. But I would look there, start with what we already got and just try to improve on it via these alchemical methods and see what you get. And I'm pretty sure you can probably stumble across something uh, that works way better than something else. Because again, it's just the method of preparing this stuff. Who would have known working with poppy, that we could have come out with morphine, or who would have known that out of a mold that's on oranges, we would have gotten penicillin. So yeah, and the fact that something is pulling you towards it, dude, wrestle with it. Go with it. You know what I'm saying? And see what you get. Research, obsess. Dude, by all means, my blessing.
That's awesome, man. I think this is a good time to put a pin in it, and we'll come
Yeah,
back to it. Maybe next time you can talk about this fabulous 100-year-old book that you got with all these wonderful formulas and cures for things.
cool.
And man, thank you. This was packed with info. I hope you guys enjoyed it, and anyone catching it on the replay, I hope you guys got something out of this as well. And thanks for joining us, and thank you, Alfredo, for coming on.
Thank you so much, Annie, for having me. This was really fun. And once again, if I'm a little long-winded, or however, I'll see it. I'll analyze myself.
We're all
I'll
long-winded
send
here.
a
We're all
replay.
long-winded when we got shit to say. It was all great, and I know there's a lot more, where that came from. So
Thank
thank
you.
you so much. And all right, man. And thank you guys. Love to the Blue Crew and to all my subscribers. If you're new to my channel, please hit the like, subscribe, and we will be back soon with another super cool video. Love you all. See you soon.
Take care, all. Thank you.